I wanted to start off by thanking you for agreeing to this interview, and to start off by asking you about the ideas of leadership as a woman that you brought with you to Deakin. Maybe role models from your past or anti-role models that you were reacting to. And also then what your vision for Deakin was, because there are some fairly standard recipes for leadership of entrepreneurial universities, and I'm not sure that you've followed that.
No.
So what was the vision you brought? And then as you work through, have your ideas of leadership changed and developed in kind of a co-creation with the people and the circumstances at Deakin?
Okay. Well, so I came to Deakin, to Victoria. So I moved from the western side of Australia to the eastern side,
Right.
which is like going, I think, from London beyond Moscow. So the east of Australia is a completely foreign land to the west. So I came as someone who was reasonably unknown to the university and to the state. Quite a lot of people knew me, but not in the, I wasn't that well known because I wasn't from that side of Australia. And of course I was a woman. And a person I valued very highly was a person who worked for me who said, you need to go in, and now Jane, you're the silverback. And silverback gorillas, control everything. And I was quite stunned. Say nothing, just listen. And it was the best piece of single advice I got. So for the first 3 months I got there, and this is contrary to almost everybody else, is I said very little and listened. Changed a couple of things very quickly, but nothing substantial, but listened in terms of the strategy. The other thing in terms of the strategy was I knew that the way we were doing distance learning could not continue, was that we were sending out parcels and students were then sending back things. And this was 2010, mid-2010. And of course, Steve Jobs had held up the smartphone. Everyone was buying smartphones. You knew, if you were keeping in touch, that the world had changed. So I knew we had to alter what we were doing. It was a successful university, it was making its way, but we were woefully nowhere in the rankings. There were campuses that were disconnected, and what was it we were going to do to be distinctive in the future? So I took much longer than the technical 100 days for a strategic plan. I threw that out of the window. I did listen. I walked around, talked to staff. Staff initially were terrified that I'd walked into the areas, and I remember someone saying, "Are you going to close my area down?" And I was quite taken aback and thought, "No, I just want to know what you think." And people told me what they thought. And many of those ideas then made it to the strategic plan that we came up with called Live the Future. And it was a consultative process over 18 months, which is an extraordinary long time to build a new strategic plan. And I remember receiving advice from a number of people saying, "You're taking too long, this is a disaster, you won't last 2 years." As it turned out, it was a very successful strategic plan. Staff embraced it because they'd been part of it, right down into the deepest parts of the organisation. If you wanted to be part of it, you had to just simply put up your hand. Now, the downside was that a lot of people put up their hands. We had huge consultative groups under a program called Create the University. I've forgotten what the acronym actually stood for, but that's not the point. And from that, we got Live the Future, which is our strategic plan, and people had bought into it and had joined it. And then I started to speak, and then I was very clear on values. At the great launch we did of our strategic plan, my talk was about our values and where we would want to be as a university: connected, inclusive, participatory. A university for Geelong, as our act had said, not to forget our roots as a distance educator, but to take distance education to the future, which was digital and smart.
Right.
And then we started the work. We changed the way we did the budget, so I was quite dictatorial in that matter, to allocate a very significant amount of money to curriculum reform, which shocked a number of our bigger research areas, stunned the executive deans. And as part of that year, a number of staff moved on. It wasn't their cup of tea, and I was very happy for them to move on. I'm reasonably direct. If I felt there were a number of people I felt were not going to join in the culture, did see themselves as a cut above, I flattened the structure, that if you live the future is flatter. And so that's what I did. And then what I have to say, I come from quite a big history of being in universities, and the experience of being a leader is built on the experience of making extraordinary number of mistakes, not too many the first time, as a junior leader. And so at Curtin, the university before, I was there for 9 years, and for 5 or 6 years of that I was the DVCA, the provost of the university. I controlled a massive budget, many staff. There was not much I hadn't seen, and as the deputy, you're the fixer. So I'd learned to do all that. So by the time I came the leader, the biggest challenge for me was to unhook myself from the detail, because I often knew it. And having to say, I have to leave this to this person, I could just do it myself, but I can't. I have to be the leader. I never called myself a silverback. I thought it was a strange term, but I had to not run. The other piece of advice I got was never run anywhere. You're in charge, people wait. I'm always on time, but I try not to run, because you need to be seen and people need to feel confident that if you're not running, everything's fine. And these are simple things, but you learn them as you go on. And the university is a connected place, and we are joined. And I believe the reason, it's not that they like me, but they support the plan, and their lives have improved in terms of the work that they do, the places they work, and the consistency of leadership and governance. That people know, as somebody else said this to me, we can tell in our school exactly what your view will be on any issue, and that's a compliment. And I think for most leaders, the biggest mistake they make is they flip and then they flop. And if you look at some of the political leadership in the world, what we hate most about it is you never know what side they're going to take on an issue.
We have some good examples of that at the moment.
And people want to know, they want to be sure that this is the way. They may not like the position you're going to take, but they know.
Right.
But
when you say that you walk but don't run, does that mean to say that you go to see people rather than people come to see you? Because that's the other adage for a leader, isn't it? Oh, sit in your office and get people to come to you rather than...
Be visible.
Yeah.
So I'll have coffee all the time. My executive, so my executive there's 12 of us, 11 plus me, so it's very flat. For my executive, they tend to come to me because it's their time to tell me things that they wish me to know, and often seek my advice. And that by its nature is private. They need to feel free to speak openly. But the next levels down, I meet staff all the time, so I will meet all the time with staff. How are you going? What do you think? It's never about HR. I never talk management issues with people. If you're having a problem with your manager, go and see your manager. And if your manager's not helping you, read the policy and go to human resources. But I have wonderful conversations, always visible. So I go to them. You also see what it looks like. You can see if people are crying in corners, whether there's demarcations. I went into one lab and they'd used a piece of chalk and they demarcated the line between the two sides, and someone had put their cup right up to the line like that, and the other person moved it back across the line. Now, what does that tell you about the culture of that laboratory?
Something's wrong.
So some of that information, not that you do anything about it, but it's in your mind's eye, and you know that when all's said and done, things aren't that well off there as they should be. And that's a leadership and a management issue. So it's not their fault. Who do you talk to? You talk to the manager, talk to the leader. It seems a bit odd, how you're going. Often they'll say, oh, and you have the conversation.
Right.
And
so
visibility
you've been there
matters.
8 years. You started off the silent silverback, listening. You then did this consultative process and got the document together, and then you spoke. Now you go walkabout. How has your idea of your role as a leader changed in those 8 years?
I expected to have to communicate less. As a consequence of the walking around and realizing that people wanted to know, what we introduced was 2 town halls at each campus each year. And I've stayed with that for, this will be the 9th year that I'm doing them. And the town hall is where I stand at the front and I give everyone a report. Here's what it looks like externally. This is what the government's up to again. Here's what the big issues for Deakin are, and here's what we're doing on the campus. Here's how we spent some of the money. You should see this, you should look at that. And it's specific to the 4 campuses. And people come to it. Very significant numbers come. One of the presentations at either Burwood or Geelong is filmed in the way we're filming now, and that's put on the web, and anybody who can't make it can go and read it. What is stunning is how many people actually go and read it after they've heard me, and then we'll write, "Dear Vice Chancellor, you said," so I'm querying, now when you said this, and you think, oh, did I?
But in the town hall, is that just you speaking to them, or is there an interchange as well?
So I speak for 20 minutes, and then there's Q&A. At the beginning, there were a lot of questions. People would question. These days, there are fewer questions, and you don't know whether it's complacency, things are going so well we don't have to worry, or whether they're just terrified by your power.
How do you find that out?
You don't. You wait and see. There's always questions. There's always questions. The bigger the audience, the fewer the questions. The smaller the audience, the more questions. And the thing that you find is people don't want to appear foolish to 600 of their peers. And so I have tended to meet schools, I'll go to school meetings, and that's where it's very intense and engaged. Gender issues, which we're talking about recently, the government, how are we going to do this? You can't take money away from us. It's not fair that engineering has all the money. Those sorts of questions. And those are fair and reasonable questions. Right. I've asked to see schools when I thought they've misbehaved. We had one particularly bad period of misbehaviour in one school. So I went and I got them all together and said, now, what are we going to do? This is disgraceful, and it's not a telling off, but it's not a good thing for you to come. And then another executive of a faculty who had decided that they wouldn't do what the Vice Chancellor had said, but of course, forgot to unhook me from the email, so I met them as well. And they were terrified because I was really quite annoyed and said, well, you will do what we're going to do, and now I'm going to give you these performance measures so that I know that you're staying with the plan. But that was early in the piece, and I think some of those consistent but firm ways, we've all agreed to do this. Now, if we're not going to do this, there's a process for feeding in, and you can feed in once a year. We have an implementation review, which I report to our governing body, our council. And so people can say, well, this is nonsense, or I don't like this. And they can go to their executive member of the committee that I chair, which meets fortnightly throughout the year. The Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, who is in the audience, is a member. And issues can come up. Every person at Deakin has line of sight to the executive committee, which I chair, through their leadership line. Nobody is not represented, no one. So there's no excuse to say I didn't know what's happening. And then, of course, the executive go back to their faculty groups, their portfolio groups, to schools, and everyone hears. But there's clay.
Right.
And there's, people have misinterpretations. So that's where the town halls come in, and they're regular. So I'm just about to do the May series. Next week I'll start in Geelong, and over the week I'll do Geelong, Burwood, Warrnambool, and 2 in Geelong, Burwood, Warrnambool. And then there's an online version, which of course the clouds see.
Right. Let's move to talking about the work you've done on gender equality. Because I've been watching the videos on YouTube. There's quite a few videos by you, and you're very, very strong on wanting to make big changes in terms of gender. So could you tell us how you've gone about that and what you've done?
So that's been an evolution as well. When you're working your way up the system, if I had to tell my younger self what to do, it would be to stress less and to realise that because you're saying things that people are irritated by, it doesn't actually mean much at all. And it's not you being stupid, it's just that you maybe raising questions that other people don't want to hear. When you get to these positions, you must use them carefully and wisely, but you have a moment in time opportunity to do something. You know, the power of being a Vice-Chancellor is profound in that you have a moment to do something. You can just sit and enjoy and shake hands and do very little else. I've chosen not to do that. And if you look at Australia, and I looked at Australia, one of our big issues is around gender. In terms of the population is 50-50. In terms of multiculturalism, we're one of the most multicultural countries in the world. And you go up 2 levels and all you see is Anglo-Celtic men and the odd woman. I frequently went to meetings where I was the only woman. Now that's fine when maybe you're in the lab, you get over it because the PhD students are women. But then when you have access to the data and you're a university and it's about truth, and about leading the community. If publicly funded universities are not speaking what needs to be said and are not leading, then why do they exist? It's just a waste of public taxpayers' money. And so getting fairness, you know, looking at what does our council do? Do we have an equity of gender? We needed to do that. At our executive, how do we get? And the bandwidth for me is never forced 50-50, it's 60-40. Because if you only have 3 people, you can't have 50-50. You either have 2 of one and 1 of the other, but you must have 1 of the other. And so you work your way down the system. But it's a work in progress. It's a societal issue at the moment in that there is a lot of criticism of the way women lead and the way women manage, particularly in Australia. And we need to deal with that. And
what
I
kind
think
of criticism and how do you deal with it?
Well, for example, in the Banking Royal Commission, you probably haven't kept us, and we have a Royal Commission into our banks. Our banks have been found to behave quite badly. And the chair of one of the biggest group people reviewed was an insurance company who happened to have a female chair who had to resign. And she has been excoriated for the way she led and the things she did, and was seen to have got there by influence rather than merit. Similar group, where a man had to resign, was just saying, you know, these are the breaks, he'll take the hit, and he'll be back in a few years, you know, heck, these things happen. And you see this difference of view, and that goes down into what I think is a shift at the moment where universities particularly are having to justify their purpose to the world, particularly with disruption, people losing jobs, people saying silly things like, you know, you don't need a degree anymore because everything's going to be run by Amazon. Well, we don't want everything run by Amazon. We do need skills. We know how complicated the world is, and that the skills of communication, teamwork, capacity to be literate and numerate and absolutely digital literate, and using an iPad or getting to Facebook is not digital literacy, are going to be fundamental, powerful skills for how we develop our community into the next decade. So it's very important that we do explain our purpose and how our students, our graduates, are getting to employability and the next thing. And that purpose is contested.
Right. But within the university, within the employment of your own staff, how have you gone about improving gender equity there?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We now have a process where you must have a balanced selection panel. It's non-negotiable, and now that's a norm. People would never dream of only having women or only having men. Never. You would always have balance. I've started to introduce that we should also have diversity, and by that I mean usually diversity of culture and colour. That we need to have people who are non-Anglo-Celtic, looking like me from a British origin. So where are our Chinese representatives, where are our Indian representatives, and not token, but are they spread into the system? So the first thing is a balanced selection committee. The second thing is a shortlist that has both genders on it. It's the most dividing thing. Both genders must be on the shortlist, and it can't be tokenism. And we've now gone through, as somebody said the other day, you know, the Vice-Chancellor is very fixed on this, very annoying, but we have to do it. Good. So you have to get a genuine shortlist. And I am particular that we need to have balance and be seen to have balance of qualified, exemplary people at the right level. But unconscious bias comes into this, where we often believe that because someone does a bad interview, they're nervous in the interview, they get narrow, they may not be suited, and that if they're charming and charismatic, that they're fine for the job, and that's not the case. And so sometimes you have to make those judgment calls based on all to have either men appointed or indeed in most cases it's women. Now it's not always the one or over the other, and that is contestable space. As I was saying yesterday at another conference, we appointed a woman engineer as head of engineering. It was a challenge to get her appointed. I inserted myself personally, met her, explained everything, took her around, gave her plenty of time to come. And as a consequence of her, we now have, I think it's 4 or 5 female engineers in our engineering school, when before that we had one, and usually often we had none. It makes a difference when you have those issues and you are firm on them. I've now hardened up much, much harder. Now I'm quite irritating about it. I think I do annoy some people. I slow processes down when they prefer not to be. Our Faculty of Business and Law are going through quite a significant change, and I've forced justification of appointments. I've forced justification of an appointment in health. Why are you doing this? Have you searched the world for an equivalent woman who would be competitive, and let's interview them both? Well, it spreads, we don't have time to do that. Well, you should have done it to begin with, and then we'd be there now. So off you go and do it again. Drives HR mad, drives the school mad, drives staff mad. But you know what? In the end, it'll be part of the culture, and we won't even think about it. That is what we will do. There's no engineers in the world who can do this. And then if you force them to go away, they come back with 2, one of whom gets in the job, and the other one we offer another job to. Interesting.
So that, what's often said about gender strategy, gender equality strategies, is that it starts off with a report and ends up with tick boxes. But the issue is how to create a process that is continuous.
So, and then the final thing, which the Deputy Vice Chancellor Research can confirm, is in their performance review. My executive, in their performance review twice a year, have to say what progress they've made in gender equality. And it's numbers, and they don't produce the numbers, HR give me the numbers. And we have a conversation. Alongside that, we have a survey of staff once every other year called I Say, where all staff are invited to respond. 92% of staff respond. And we look at that for issues. Are there issues around, what are the issues? Are there bullying, harassment, culture, health issues? And if there are those areas, well, what are you doing about these issues? They're the most important issues to deal with, because if you don't have values and culture, you don't have an operation.
So you actually follow up on those?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So my town halls next week, there are 2 slides, and in those slides, this is what you said about I Say. This is collectively now, and here are the 4 projects that are happening, and here's where we've got to. And people wait to hear that and listen. And then at the faculty, it's particularly in the faculties, because that's where most of the staff are, they get their own specific, this is what's happening in health, and health is very different to science engineering. Health are much more particular on certain things, and science engineering are very particular on other things. Well, those are the things you need to focus on to make sure that the universities are cohesive.
Right.
And some things are non-negotiable.
Right. You mentioned the contestability of the role of the university in society now, and the importance of using the cloud and the latest technologies. Could you explain the diversity aspects and the gender aspects of that? How is that enabling Deakin to diversify its student intake?
Yes.
And to ensure equality between men and women students?
Okay, so 56% of Deakin students are women.
Right.
56%. If you actually then go to postgraduate and look at the cloud, the numbers of women in the cloud is higher. The number of women in our face-to-face who go part-time and take more than the standard 8 years to get their degree is growing. We have enabled flexibility, that you can go part-time, that you can smear your units over a longer period if you so wish. Now, the government measure things at 6 and 8 years. We have decided to take the hit at 8 years, that we have a slightly higher attrition in the cloud particularly, because here's the thing. Let's take an average nurse. 92% of nurses are women. An average nursing graduate is 23. She does a year, maybe gets married, has her first child at 24. Now, what if she does it the other way? What if she does it the other way? She decides to work, gets married, starts to do her degree, does her first year, and she's 25 and she has her first child. First child, she takes a full year off, a full year out of university, so count one down. Then she thinks, no, I think I'll have another child because I want my children close together. So she has another child, she takes another year off. But in the meantime, she's done 1 or 2 units. So she's keeping it going, but slow. She finishes in 8.5 years with a high distinction degree, the best nurse of her year, gets the best job at the local hospital, and she is a black mark for the university because she took more than 8 years. Now, from a societal point of view, what do you think was better? Holding to government and forcing everyone, you can only come here if you'll do it in 8 years, or enabling a very good woman to have a good family, to bring up her children and to have that period and get her degree and become a member of society. Well, I'm going with the second, but it's a terrible issue.
So
it's a shocking issue.
That hits Deakin financially, does it?
It doesn't hit us financially, it hits you in the rankings, that you go, your ranking on retention is a measure of performance. Now, I think in a modern, sophisticated world where people have modern, sophisticated lives, is different. The one other thing I'd say about the cloud has enabled women who can't travel, who do have responsibilities, to get an education. I see that as one of the most significant things we have to offer. The number of people doing MOOCs, the number of people doing their degrees online is higher for women than for men, and that's been an advantage and has been an inclusive strategy. The number of people who come from socially disadvantaged areas, who cannot afford to study full-time but must work and study, are enabled by an online system. Let's never forget that not all of us are privileged and born to rich middle-class families who can afford to do all these things, go to uni, finish uni, get married, have children, live happily ever after. There are many, many variations on that. And all universities have a responsibility, in my view, to be inclusive of that issue.
Right.
And I'm very strong. Many of us are I'm first generation.
Me too.
My mother never worked, and for my mother, my education was the most important thing.
Good. There's another aspect of the strong IT dimensions of what's going on in Deakin. To do it, you've got very productive relationships with Cisco and with IBM Watson.
Yes.
And I'm interested in the kind of digital citizenship aspect of that, because I was reading a piece by David Runciman from Cambridge saying, our democracies will not implode, but they will simply fade away, hollowed out by forces of technological progress and social division that we lack the power to understand, never mind resist. So I'm wondering where in the education system at Deakin the students are beginning to look reflexively at the cloud and at the data that they're giving. Who do they give it to?
Who do they give it to?
Who controls it? How do they control it?
And where does it go when they leave?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So here's the thing. So when the first Greek put a statement on a stone and chipped it out. One of the great citizens in Athens said, we have to stop that, because if we put things on stone, people will lose the capacity to tell stories. And it's the stories that lead our history. And so it goes. I remember the first adding up machines. What did we call them?
Calculators.
Calculators. I've even forgotten the name of a calculator. I remember in our family, we were not a wealthy family. And my younger sister is a gifted physicist. She's only 36 months younger than me, Catholic family, we're clumped. And we all collected money to buy her a calculator, because for physics at the university she went to, she had to have a calculator. And we were astounded by this thing. And my father said, this is terrible, you'll all forget how to do things, I'm staying with my slide rule. I rest my case on digital. Digital has been one of the most enabling, leveling issues in the world, that anybody who can get access to the internet, the most poor person in India, there are 70 million illiterate people in India. Many of them have a phone. On a phone they can get access to free MOOCs anywhere in the world. MIT will tell you the story of a young Mongolian boy who went and did one of their MOOCs and then did the test, and they immediately enrolled him at the university, went and got him, gave him a scholarship, and he's now ensconced, I suppose, at MIT. And they openly admitted, I remember listening to the talk, he openly admitted that their selection process would have excluded this young man from MIT. No schooling, for one. Wrong side of the blankets for another, probably. No parents to support him to get to America. That young man is now getting one of the best educations in the world because he had access to the internet and he was clever enough to get through a test. And what it showed MIT was they were being too exclusive over here, and all the fine minds, because they say the finest minds come to MIT. Some of the finest minds were excluded by definition of their definitions. So I'm always hopeful of humanity. I think we are questioning. We have one of our big AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning conferences coming up, has a whole session on the ethics. What are we doing about the ethics of data and the ethics of artificial intelligence? Who owns data? What do we do with data? What are the policies that we must ask government to do and then to enforce so we control our data? I think we are being more ethical than Facebook has been with the data. When Mark Zuckerberg says yesterday to the Union, well, these things are out of the box now, there's not much we can do, while he's collecting money on the way through. Well, I think that's unforgivable. But Facebook is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the controlled use of a medium, which is no different to pencil and paper, or after that, calculators, to enable people access to the intellect and the truth of the world in ways they may not have access to it because of the misfortune of where they were born, or the color of their skin, or the country they live in. And that is a fundamental issue of access that I believe in.
I can see that, and you speak very powerfully on it. But on the digital citizenship side and the future of democracy, how is Deakin protecting that within its...
So we have a thing called our Deakin Shield. We're one of only 2 universities in Australia that has the shield at the very highest level. Now it annoys staff completely and students, because to get to where you need to be, you have to go through 2 pieces which completely protects data. So, for example, in one of our systems called Deakin Genie, which students sign up to, it's on their phone, it will tell you, Jane, your lecture's in 15 minutes, you should stop making your way because you're 25 minutes away. Jane, your assignment is due at midnight tonight, and I notice you haven't gone near the learning management system. Now, some people might think, well, the university knows all this about the student. Actually, we don't, because we've used machine learning to marry up their assignments, assessments to who their number is, and it tells the student number these things haven't happened. We say, if they don't go here at this time, send this message. If this doesn't happen, do that. There is one exception, and we advise students of this. We advise students that all of it is private and it is protected. You can check. If, however, you say to Deacon Jeannie, I need help, I'm feeling very sad today, we trigger those words, and artificial intelligence these days is astounding. We trigger those words to our counselling area. And you know, one suicide is enough for me to justify that level of access on a person where the person will get a different message. It looks like you're sad. Do you wish to speak to a counsellor? And there's a number. And if they don't, in some cases, I think the reverse happens. I think it is the issue of the year for the big democracies. For the big democracies, how do we deal with the protection of my data? I'm not on Facebook, but Facebook have data on me. Well, I resent that. I don't want them to have data on me. In the same way, universities have an obligation to protect and to do it ethically, and for the data to always remain in the property of the person. So the moment the student leaves or the unit leaves, all of that stuff should either disappear or be frozen in some encrypted way, which no one can see it except the person involved with their password.
So
and
Cisco
identity.
and IBM don't have access to this data? They're not using it to learn their systems?
They can't get access to it. So what we learnt on Watson, but we didn't go with Watson because of that very issue of the black box. So we have built our own system where the data remains inside the domain of Deakin. And none of the data that we have is anything more than on the enrolment form. So we've been quite particular. We've spent a fortune on this. It's quite revolutionary. Quite a number of people have asked to buy our system. I don't think we're anywhere near ready to sell it to anyone because we need to make sure of our own surety. Our students love it. You know, I've yet to meet an under 25-year-old, with the deepest respect to any under 25-year-olds, who doesn't sell their entire soul to get a free Wi-Fi number. We need to educate the next generation better to being much more considered about who they give everything away to. My children laugh because I won't tell Google where I am. So maps are often a bit complicated for me. Well, I don't think I will tell Google that. Oh, Mum, please, they know where you are anyway. Well, I suppose they do, but I'm not giving it to them. My children, giving it away. Interesting. So biggest point in the thing. The articles are very interesting, but I think taking a despotic view to an optimistic view is the big debate, and we need to have it. But through history, we have had that debate. Books were seen as a threat to scribes who would tell stories. The monasteries died in 1545 as a consequence of the printing press and books. As a consequence of books, universities blossomed around the world, and you and I sit here today as educated women as a consequence of that move. Otherwise, we would probably not have survived childbirth.
To conclude, it's a real privilege to talk to you, and I'm sure people watching this will be learning a lot from what you've said. You're going to be seen as a role model, whether you like it or not.
Well, people should make their own minds up. You know, mine is one perspective on the world.
Sure.
There's others.
But to learn from that perspective, can you see other people around you at Deakin learning from you? Is there a style of leadership that is spreading in Deakin from people learning about you?
Look, that's when you get to legacy, and I think others comment on those sorts of things. My view is that people are slightly gentler than when I got there. There are fewer fights and abusive things. I think that is much better now, and I think people do understand that if you've got an issue, raise it. The best way is send an email. So you can send an email to me. Any staff or student can email me at least once, and if it's something silly, I'll tell them, look, this is not a matter for me, and really, why are you wasting your time? If you want to ask me something of substance. I almost never have said that, just once.
And nationally, you mentioned that some women who've had very high profile positions in Australia have been highly criticised, but can you see that you're having an influence amongst other university vice-chancellors or in the other organisations?
The women vice-chancellors in Australia, we band together.
Yeah.
We do. We band together on certain things, and I think that's been a good thing. We differ on many other things, and that's a good thing. Why should we have to always think the same? And that's important. And I think we all, I firmly believe that we have differentiated some of our universities, and for Deakin to differentiate, to take the view, to go to the digital frontier, to go to a much stronger relationship with industry, much more like Danish universities, might I say. Your connection to industry is very strong. Well, we've made that journey, so we've differentiated ourselves to do that. And I've, of necessity, had to lead that, but I lead amongst a team, and the other thing, I don't get on the horse and ride into the valley. Are you all behind me? I do see it. Who's the expert in the room? Okay, you're on. Now talk about it. If it's research, Peter talks about it. If we're doing something complicated about our digital frontier, the Chief Digital Officer leads the conversation. If it's teaching and learning and a pedagogy issue, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education leads the issue, and so it goes. And that we're a team of experts rather than one expert with a group of people who have to do. We're all leading, and we're all leading in a certain way, and it's values-based. And I believe that at Deakin, people understand our values.
And how would you describe those?
Those values. Excellence. If you're not doing it with excellence, stop doing it. If this is B-grade work, stop doing it. So excellence matters. Ethics, we must work with ethics and integrity, and that becomes it's becoming a rising issue, I think, in the world at the moment, in fake news and post-truth or whatever we're calling it. Inclusive, I believe an inclusive approach, not an exclusive approach. Everybody's in until they're not in, and everyone can join a conversation until they're not in the conversation. And then sustainability, that whatever we do, we must be sustainable and make good use of public money and do good for the community. Now, most people at Deakin can knock those off. Maybe not as quickly as I can, because I I lie in bed at night and worry about them. But if you asked anyone at Deakin, what is our mission, they'll say, education for the jobs of the future, research that makes a difference to the community we serve. Everybody knows that, and I think that at least means we're all swimming in the same direction and have a view of how we will deliver what we do. But that doesn't mean there's no contestation at Deakin. We have very robust discussions on big issues, on little issues, on parking, the quality of food, name the topic. Get 20 people in the university together and you've got 22 views.
Yeah.
And they'll often change their view halfway, so it gets confusing.
Gets to 46.
Yeah.
Jane, thank you very, very much indeed for an extremely interesting interview.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you.